Have you ever wondered how your ancestors survived for over 1 million years tending fire they had absolutely no idea how to start? Not because they were primitive, because making fire and using fire are two entirely different things, and the gap between them is so enormous it barely fits inside human imagination. Most people assume fire was always there, a given, a constant. It wasn't. For most of human prehistory, fire was a borrowed thing, seized from lightning, carried across landscapes, guarded through rainstorms. And the moment someone finally learned to create it on demand only became clear last December, when a discovery in a Suffolk field pushed the fire-making timeline back by 350,000 years in a single afternoon. 10 facts about fire and early humans follow from here, and most of them have never made it into mainstream history content. The last one reframes all the others, so keep that in mind as we go. There is a version of human history where fire was always there. A reliable, nightly campfire, keeping our ancestors warm, cooking their food, holding the dark at bay. That version is wrong. And the real story is so much stranger that it changes how you think about what humans actually are. Here's the thing that almost nobody talks about. Using fire and making fire are two completely different achievements, and they are separated by over 1 million years. Fire use developed over 1 million years, progressing from harvesting natural fire to maintaining it and ultimately to making it. 1 million years of tending a flame that you did not know how to start. That is the gap nobody tells you about. And inside that gap, there are 10 truths about fire and early humans that most history content hasn't touched, including a discovery announced just last December that rewrote the entire timeline by 350,000 years. We're going to go through all 10 of them, and I'll tell you right now, the last one is the one that actually changes how you see every other point on this list. Keep that in mind. Let's start with the one that reframes everything else. For a very long time, the oldest solid fire evidence we had pointed to roughly 1 million years ago, and the place it came from was not a campsite in the open air. New evidence from South Africa's Wonderwerk Cave suggests early humans were using fire inside caves far earlier than many archaeologists once believed, with signs of repeated fire use in deposits dating between about 1.07 million and 1.79 million years ago. Think about what that means for a second. The fossils came from deposits at least 30 meters inside the cave. Natural grass or bushfires would have struggled to reach such depths. Researchers argue that this distance makes accidental burning from wildfires unlikely. Someone had to carry burning material deep underground and keep it alive. That is not scavenging a wildfire. That is intent. That is management. The hominins responsible were most likely Homo erectus, and they appear to have been neither passive observers of natural wildfires nor sophisticated firemakers. They were somewhere in between. A category we don't really have a word for. Fire tenders. Fire babysitters. And that brings us to something that sounds almost absurd once you understand the scale of it. Because those fire tenders did this for an enormous stretch of time without being able to create a single spark on their own. Imagine your group captures a flame from a lightning strike. Now you have to keep it alive. You feed it, you carry smouldering material from camp to camp, you protect it from rain, from wind, from anything that might snuff it out. And if it dies, if one rainstorm gets lucky, you don't just go find more wood. You wait. You wait for the next lightning strike, which could be days away, or weeks, or longer. That was the reality for hundreds of thousands of years. Fire was not a tool you owned. It was a living thing you were responsible for, and losing it was a genuine catastrophe. So when did that actually change? When did someone figure out how to make fire instead of just keeping it? This is where the December 2025 discovery comes in, and it is genuinely one of the most significant finds in the history of archaeology. A field in eastern England revealed evidence of the earliest known instance of humans creating and controlling fire. In Barnham, Suffolk, the discovery of baked earth that formed a hearth, heat-shattered flint axes, and 2 fragments of pyrite, a type of stone used to create sparks for lighting tinder, indicates that early humans, most likely Neanderthals, were able to make and maintain fires. And the detail that makes this airtight is the pyrite itself. The naturally occurring mineral wasn't available in the immediate environment, suggesting that these people understood its firelighting properties and had sought out the mineral. They didn't stumble across it, they went and got it, specifically because they knew what it could do. Humans were making fire 350,000 years earlier than previously recorded. The lead researcher at the British Museum called it the most remarkable discovery of his career. And most fire history content online still hasn't caught up to it. Now, here's a detail that makes the Barnham discovery even more interesting. Tests suggested that this was not just one burning event, but a series of repeated burning in the same location. The conclusion was clear. This was a campfire, or hearth, that had been used by people on several occasions. These weren't people who stumbled into fire-making once. They came back. They used the same spot. That is a routine. That is a technology embedded into daily life. And speaking of returning to the same spot, there is a site in Israel that takes this idea to a level that genuinely feels like science fiction. At a place called Gesher Benot Ya'aqov, the early Middle Pleistocene site has preserved evidence of hearth-related hominin activities and large numbers of freshwater fish remains, more than 40,000 of them. The hearths weren't random. The burnt flints found at Gesher were not distributed randomly, as if they had been burned in a natural bushfire, but were found in dense concentrations, likely marking the locations where hominins purposefully and repeatedly made hearths and lit their fires over tens of thousands of years. And what were they doing at those hearths? Cooking. Archaeologists found the 780,000-year-old remains of a cooked carp-like fish at this site. This is a fixed, reused kitchen, a place people came back to, again and again, to cook the same kinds of fish in the same spots for tens of thousands of years. That's not survival behavior. That's something closer to culture. And it happened more than 700,000 years before our species existed. But I want to stay with the gap for a moment, because it's easy to hear these discoveries and imagine fire use as this steady, reliable thing that just kept getting better. The reality is messier than that. For most of the period between the first evidence of fire use and the point where fire-making became dependable, fire was rare and occasional, not a nightly given. Researchers have found that at most sites older than 400,000 years, there's simply no evidence of routine cooking or regular fire use. Some researchers have even calculated that maintaining a fire could cost more energy than the extra calories it delivered, which means early humans sometimes made the entirely rational decision that fire just wasn't worth the trouble. Think about that. The most transformative technology in human history, and some of our ancestors looked at it and said, too much work. That tells you something real about how precarious and effortful fire actually was before it became reliable. And yet, some groups pushed into brutal cold anyway. Hominins were moving into freezing northern latitudes as early as 1.5 to 2 million years ago, but habitual fire use didn't become dependable until 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. That is a staggering window of time, potentially over 1 million years, where some groups endured Ice Age Europe with no reliable fire to fall back on, no guaranteed warmth, no guaranteed cooked food, just biology, group cooperation, and whatever they could find or carry. The fact that they survived at all says something extraordinary about how adaptable early humans were, and it makes you wonder what else they were doing to stay alive that left no trace in the archaeological record. We're about halfway through, and I haven't told you the thing yet that ties all of this together. Hold on to that. Now, about Neanderthals, because they tend to get a bad reputation in the popular imagination, and the fire evidence does not support it. Sites in northern France had evidence of late Neanderthals making fire 50,000 years ago, and the wear patterns on their tools tell a very specific story. Dozens of hand axes from French sites show exactly the kind of damage you'd expect from striking iron pyrite against flint to throw sparks. Essentially, a Stone Age lighter kit, carried and used deliberately. The Barnham evidence pushes this behavior back much further and suggests it may have originated with Neanderthal ancestors or closely related species. The point is, the best direct evidence of firemaking in the ancient world was left behind by Neanderthals, not by us. That's worth sitting with. And the sophistication didn't stop at the spark. Ancient fire starting had a curated toolkit. At the Neolithic site of La Draga in Spain, researchers found specific species of fungi that had been selected and kept as tinder. Evidence that some groups had learned exactly which natural materials caught a spark best. This wasn't grab whatever is nearby. This was knowledge, passed down, tested, refined. A fire-starting kit with intentional components. The gap between that and a modern lighter is mostly just metallurgy. So now we've covered the ember tending, the gap, the Barnham discovery, the Israeli kitchen, the Ice Age survival, the Neanderthal spark kits, the curated tinder. But I told you the last point changes how you see all the others, and here's why. The ability to make fire would have been critically important in human evolution, accelerating evolutionary trends such as developing larger brains, maintaining larger social groups, and increasing language skills. But the mechanism that most people skip over isn't warmth or cooking, it's time. Firelight extends the day past sunset. Before fire, when the sun went down, you went quiet. You stayed still. You waited for light to return. After fire, you had hours of illuminated downtime that didn't exist before. And some researchers argue that those hours are where human social life actually got built. Talking, storytelling, group bonding, the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. None of that happens efficiently in pitch darkness. Benefits included warmth, protection from predators, cooking, and creation of illuminated spaces that became focal points for social interaction. The campfire didn't just keep people warm, it gave them a place to become people in the way we recognize. And that reframes everything. The ember tenders in Wonderwerk Cave weren't just keeping warm, they were creating the conditions for something bigger to happen around that fire. The groups that babysat flames across rainstorms and migrations weren't just preserving heat, they were preserving the social glue that fire made possible. The Neanderthals with their pyrite kits weren't just solving a practical problem. They were making sure that social life, that extended day, that circle of light, could happen on demand. Fire wasn't just a technology, it was the container that held early human culture together. So here's where we land. The story of fire isn't a smooth climb from darkness to campfire. Ancient fire remains are fragile. Ash disperses, charcoal decays, and sediments wash away. Evidence for early fire-making is remarkably rare. What we do have tells us this. Hominins were carrying fire deep into caves nearly 1.8 million years ago. They were cooking fish at fixed kitchen sites 780,000 years ago. They were enduring Ice Age cold for potentially 1 million years without reliable fire. And then, 400,000 years ago, in a Suffolk field, someone struck 2 pieces of fool's gold against a flint, caught a spark in dry fungus, and changed the trajectory of our species. 350,000 years earlier than we thought last year. The thing that changed from the beginning of this video to right now is the scale of the gap. You came in knowing fire was important. You're leaving knowing that the most important part of the fire story isn't the flame. It's the 1 million years of fragile, effortful, sometimes irrational persistence that came before anyone could make one. If that kind of deep dive into human origins is what you're here for, there's a video sitting right next to this one that goes just as deep into something else our ancestors did that we completely misunderstand. And it'll hit the same way this one did. Drop a comment below telling me which fact surprised you most, because I genuinely want to know, and it helps more people find this video. Subscribe if you want more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.